Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Sophos Threat Academy. We're into the final session today, and I'm delighted to welcome back Ben. Ben, how are you? How was your weekend?
I'm doing really well, and the weekend was perfect, to be honest. No complaints. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. And I know Ben's going to miss these late evening calls, so Ben, I'll do my best to keep bothering you kind of late into the evening as we go through. We've got some great content coming up today, and we're going to jump straight into it. We've got quite a lot we want to pack in today. We want to make sure we've got some time at the end for your questions. So we will be doing a live threat hunt today, as we talked about in our last session on Thursday. And in a minute, I'll bring in Andrew Mundell and we'll have a talk through that. There's a couple of ground rules I want to go through first in terms of what we're going to be doing today. And the first of those is just to mention our Slido platform that we're going to use for questions and for the interactivity and the polling side of this today. So you can see on screen there, you've got a QR code, you've also got a link to Slido and a 5-digit ID, 24534. As I said on Thursday, if you've got a mobile device, a tablet, another screen, it'd be great if you could open up Slido in that. Obviously, within the page that you've landed on today, there is a panel over on the right, and you can get to that. That'll still work. It's just if you want to see what we're going to be talking about full screen, and we're going to be spending quite a lot of time in Software Central, then there's that option to have it open on a second device. So take a note of this. What we'll do, we'll pop an announcement on that Slido panel over on the page now, so that you can always kind of get to that link as well. The other thing to mention is that we will be using these polls quite a lot as we go through. So Andrew, when he's going through this session, will say something like, right, let's take your input now. And that's the way we're going to drive the session. We'll be waiting for you and what you think we should do next in the threat hunt. So make sure you please interact with those, give us your choice, and Andrew will talk through what those choices are and why and kind of what the potential impacts of making each choice are. And we'll go through like that. When we finish the session, we'll come back, we'll have a bit of a conversation about what we've learned, and then just wrap up, and I will make sure I touch on how you can get to all these sessions on demand, what we're going to do about the certification that we've talked about, and how you'll get to that, and more information there. So with that, let's bring in Andrew if we can. And Andrew, good morning, welcome. So Andrew's joining us all the way from New York, so a big thank you to him for joining us so early in this. Andrew, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Nick. Hey, Ben, how you guys doing?
Doing well.
Yeah, doing great. Thank you, Andrew. All right, so what I'll do is I'll hand over to you, Andrew, now. If you want to just talk everyone through what we're going to do today, how we're going to be working it, and then we'll jump straight into it, if that's all right.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick, and welcome, everybody. We're really excited for this session. As Nick said, we're going to heavily be using those polls for Slido today. So we really want to make sure that you've got access to those, and they're really time sensitive as we go through. So what is it we're doing today? We're doing a live threat hunt. It's kind of like one of those choose your own adventure books. We're going to use those polls to ask you at a number of different stages through the threat hunt what you think we should do next. And we think a really good resource for that is going to be that threat hunting framework. So we're all nerds here, aren't we? We've all got enough devices. Let's get another device open or another window and open up that link that you can see there. And I definitely recommend having that threat hunting framework document handy off to the side. We'll make sure to reference back in with that as we go through. So in a moment, we're going to start our very first poll. And as you can see inside of that framework document, all threat hunts have to start with a hypothesis. We have to start with an idea of what it is that we're going to hunt for. So we've got 3 options for you today that we want to offer you as a starting place for a threat hunt. The first is to investigate the presence of an IOC or an indicator of compromise. The second is to use some other hypothesis that comes out of one of the built-in queries. The third option, and I'm not trying to tip the scale here, but this is kind of the most interesting one to me, is to start with writing a brand new manual query inside of SQL. So those are the 3 options for you. It's looking like we might have a bit of a clear winner already, but we'll give that just another moment. So to recap, option 1 is to look at the presence of an IOC or an indicator of compromise. The second is to use one of those built-in queries that we've already built into the platform for you. Or the third is to look at writing a manual query for ourselves from scratch. So, Nick, are you seeing the same results I am? It's a bit of a clean sweep. I'm a little surprised.
I am. Maybe your kind of verbal cues to people, this is the most interesting one, didn't make it through in time. But yeah, I would say resoundingly, Andrew, people have voted to go for the IOC. So let's jump into that, I think.
Perfect. Thanks very much, everybody. Great work on getting into that poll and getting your votes in early. We really appreciate it. And we've got plenty more of those to come. So here we are inside of Sophos Central. Very quick shout out and thanks to my colleague Andy Martin, who is driving the screen for us today. You'll remember Andy from his session last week. So let's jump in. We're going to go into the Threat Analysis Center. And from here, we're going to go into our live discover. And we're going to make sure that we check off. We just have 2 machines in this little demo environment today. We're going to select both of those machines, make sure that we're targeting those. And then we're going to come in and choose a query. So for this one, we're going to provide you with an IOC, and it's going to be the SHA 256 of our process. So we've already got that prepared. And what we're going to do is go and use this built-in query for a process matching these SHA-256 hashes. So we'll run this search now. We're going to go ahead and just run that query. You can see that the query has a built-in time where it looks in the past 30 days. And well, this is kind of interesting. Both of our machines have a positive match on that SHA 256. They're both running out of the same path, a really interesting looking thing there called Kali Connect. I think we've all had a little bit about Kali Linux this week, so that's kind of interesting. And on that right-hand side, that far column, what we can see there is a Sophos PID. So if we jump back in our minds and think about that threat hunting framework, what we're trying to do with that framework is we're trying to identify something that we called a signal. We're trying to identify something that we can use as a starting off point to continue our investigation. I think here what we found is a really strong signal. We've been given this IOC or indicator of compromise through some sort of threat intel sharing service. And we can see that this machine, both of these machines, in fact, have executed this particular process. Now, what we're looking at with this Sophos PID, it's in 2 parts. The first part, right here, there's 4 digits. That's the process ID on the machine itself. The last part there is essentially a time code. What that does is it gives us the ability to uniquely identify that process execution. Now, we can see here that these processes have both only executed once, so that's why there's just 1 entry here. So now that we've identified what we think is a strong signal in this Sophos process ID, the next stage for us to move into is the data acquisition and analysis stage. Now for that, I think we want to start with this Sophos PID, and this is where we need your help again. So we're going to launch another poll in just a moment, and we would like your guidance. If we take a look back into the threat hunting framework document, you'll see down in the acquire and analyze data section, for a process, there's 3 really good processes for us to, 3 really useful queries for us to take a look at. The first is to run this process activity history. And what that will do is pull a bunch of data about what that process did on the system. The second is to look at the process tree. What that will do is tell us where in the system did that process appear? The third is to look at the process details. That'll give us some specific information about the process itself. Now, these three are all really useful queries for us to run. Each of them gives us some different information. So what we're really interested here to see from your votes is, what do you think we should do next? What's the most important thing that we want to understand right now? And let's just recap those three options again. One of the options is to look at the process details. That's going to tell us some information about the process and the executable itself. The second part of me is to look at the process tree. That process tree will tell us whereabouts in the execution of the system that process is, what it started from, and maybe what it did afterwards. And then we've got the process activity history. That one is going to tell us everything that one process has carried out. So, Nick, this one is looking maybe a little bit less resounding than question one, but having said that, I think do we have a clear winner at this point?
One second, thank you for that. Sorry about the mic muting there. It's been really interesting, Andrew, while you've been talking, watching those results bounce back and forward. Kind of, I think as you were offering different views on each option, it was kind of guiding maybe people's votes. But I agree with you. We've got the activity history as our clear winner at the moment. So I think that's where we should jump into.
Perfect. I am doing my best not to be a news pundit person and doing any kind of spin on these. So process activity history for the Sophos PID. What Andy's going to do for us is grab that Sophos PID. We'll come over and we'll take a look at the built-in queries. We'll find that process activity history and we'll paste in that PID and we'll get that query running. This one can produce quite a lot of data. So I might fill for just, actually that was pretty quick. Look at that. So quite a large amount of data here. And Andy, perhaps you could take a look at some of that far right-hand column for us. There's quite a lot of noise here. Even though we're doing some filtering inside of the query itself, you can see that there's quite a lot of things that are, it's slightly, I don't want to say at this stage normal Windows things, but that look pretty normal, loading up certain things out of the system folder. So whilst this is a useful query for telling us what this process itself did, it might be a little too early for us to run this query. So let's take that Sophos process ID, because what I'd really like to know right now is where in the system did this process come from? So we're gonna change the results here a little bit. Let's go take a look at that Sophos process tree. Right now, I think for where we are in this hunt, this will give us a little bit more information. So we're going to grab that process tree for the Sophos PID. We're going to drop that same process ID in, and we're going to go off and run that process tree. Now, there's quite a lot going on inside of this process tree, but what we want to do is identify the process right in the middle, and that's the one that doesn't have any of these little chevron markers. That's the one that we searched for. So what we're doing with this process tree is we're saying, work your way back through all of the parent and grandparents until you get to the root process in the system, and then work your way forward through all of the children of that process as well. So now that we can see where this Kali Connect process came from, we can start to step up through each of the previous processes. And what this will do is tell us, how did this threat arrive on the machine? So as we work our way up, we can see that this came from something interesting called threat menu. And if we take a look at the parent process for threat menu, we're seeing that that arrived through some interesting PowerShell. And if we take a look there, PowerShell, what did it do? It connected to the internet, it downloaded this executable, it saved it into a specific location on the C drive, and then it executed it. Well, that's interesting PowerShell. It's not malicious by itself, but it's definitely interesting. Let's go to the next process though. Where did that PowerShell come from? And this bit is really interesting. So this PowerShell was originated from Word. What I really like about this part of the process tree is we can see the document that was used to access, the document that was accessed that resulted in this PowerShell launch. You can see it there in the temporary internet location, a really long file name. We'll maybe talk a little bit more about that file name later. But what we can see is Word being launched by Outlook. So we now have a really solid idea that this particular threat, arrived through email. So what happened afterwards though? So let's work our way back down to our Threat Cali Connect, and let's step forward now. So now we know where this thing came from. What did it do when it arrived? So what it did was it actually seemed to go off and spawn another process, which itself, that's CMD, itself then spawned another process, this time of MSHTA. So this is the built-in viewer, essentially, application for reading these HTML applications. We can see in this command and the one beneath it that MSHTA was launched and it was given a URL. That URL, if we squint a little bit on my screen, I can see it says Netflix. Actually, does it say net? No, it doesn't. It says Netflix with 2 eyes.com. So we can assume that there was some kind of phishing thing in here in this email that encouraged the user to open this document, and perhaps as part of that social engineering, it was leveraging something to do with Netflix. Once that MSHTA launches, we can see some more processes being spawned. Let's look at that first one. That is CMD. It is launching some PowerShell. And I think we all see a bit of a red flag straight away with some of that PowerShell stuff. Lots of encoded, obfuscated content. In fact, PowerShell is launching quite a lot of processes here. This looks a lot like some sort of stager, perhaps a command and control beacon that was loaded up in through this MSHTA process. If we keep on moving down all of these different PowerShell processes, we'll see some pretty similar things. Obfuscated content being loaded. That's part of a process of evasion. The attackers here are trying to hide what they're actually doing. What we're quite interested in though is as we go all the way down, that very last launch of PowerShell, it doesn't have any commands next to it. Now that's interesting because that implies that someone just launched, the attacker here just launched a PowerShell shell itself, maybe for them to type some of their own commands into. And we'll maybe hear a little bit more about that later on. So we've now got a really solid understanding of everything that our initial IOC process carried out. We saw exactly where it came from, and we saw really what it specifically did. So next up, we need your help again. We're going to launch another poll, and this time we're going to be asking a couple of different questions of you. So now that we've arrived at this place in our understanding of the threat, there's really 2 different places we could go. The first is to continue investigating this machine. Is there anything else that happened on this machine during this attack that might be interesting to us, that might give us some more signals that we should then investigate further? Or At this point, should we start to look and see, could this threat have carried out more things elsewhere on the network? We know potentially that one of those systems had this executable, but did a similar process, a similar series of events happen over on that other system. So that's going to determine the next place that we go, our next series of queries and of hunting that we're going to run. So to recap, right now that we've understood exactly what happened with this specific threat in this one part of the process tree, what do we want to do? Should we look at the rest of the activity that perhaps happened on this system? Or should we take a look and see what happened out on other systems? Do we think we've learned enough from this machine that we should move on? Or should we take a bit of a deeper look? Nick, I'm taking a quick look at the Slido panel. This one's neck and neck right down to the wire.
Absolutely. And again, just like the last one, it's been bouncing back and forth. There's a while you were talking, Andrew, where it was 50-50. And I was worried that we're going to have to cast to the side and vote. But I think as I look at it now, have other systems been affected by something similar is slightly edging it. We've got a good amount of people voting on it. So let's jump down that route. And maybe as we come back to the end of the session, we can talk a bit about what might have happened had we jumped down the other route.
Perfect. That's great. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Nick. So we want to investigate, did any other systems get affected by anything similar? So we're going to scroll up. And I think one of the interesting ways that we can look at this is that attachment. So we know that this threat arrived by email. And if we take a look at that attachment name, this is a pretty typical attachment that an attacker may send through a phishing attempt. What we can see is a long string of a whole bunch of numbers. There is some text right there in the middle, though. So we've got that really long string. Thank you, Andy, for making that a little easier for us all to see. That's great. So there's a long string of potentially random numbers. We've definitely seen attackers change file names quite a lot. And there's an interesting bit right in the middle, DECLASSG. What typically when you see words like that, that's kind of related to something that was inside of the email to make it feel a little bit more real for the end user. So that's probably a really good string for us to go and take a look for. So we're going to copy that. We're going to come back up to our list of queries, and we've got a built-in query, which is called File Access History. Now, one of the really nice things that hopefully you've seen through some of the other sessions is that we can use some wildcards as we're defining some of these things here. So let's into our file path, we're going to use the % symbol, and then that string DECLASSG, and then another %. What that's going to do is it's going to look for that string of characters anywhere in any file name. This query has a start and end date, so we're going to go ahead and choose those. And let's hit run query, and let's take a look at what we're going to see. So the previous investigation, we took a look at machine number 2, Academy 2. And actually right now, if we scroll all the way down, we'll get into the device telemetry section. And what we want to have a quick look at in that device telemetry section is, forgive the performance numbers here. These are just a couple of little poorly provisioned VMs that we have running on a little lab here. But what we're really interested in is that data transfer column. This is a really easy, quick way of seeing, did any other machines return results? We can see the table above that we've got results from both machines. If either of our machines had no interactions to that file, that data transfer would say 0. And the little completion summary at the top would also say no data sent for that machine. So that's a really good way of identifying at a glance whether this is something that's been present across multiple systems. We can see that both of our machines, and we just looked at machine number 2, so we're interested now in machine number 1, and actually that's the display that we have right now. So we'll go up and we'll take a look at one of these series of events. We can see quite a lot of access, but as we'd expect, we can see Outlook creating a file, and there it is. Yep, there's Outlook creating that file, and then it's opening that file in WinWord. So we know that this same attach, or a very similar attachment, was received through email. So what we might want to do at this point is use Word as a starting off point. So what we can do here is we can take that Sophos process ID, that Sophos PID for the Word process, and let's actually go back and run that process tree again, but this time using machine number 1 as our target. So we'll go find that same process tree query. You can see we probably spend quite a lot of time in here. To make this run a little bit more quickly, we're just going to choose and select only machine number 1. We don't want to risk anything with live demos here, so we'll target that machine number 1. Obviously, it's only machine number 1 that's going to return any results, because this PID is unique. This Sophos PID is unique to executing on this machine itself. So we'll give this just a moment as it runs through and builds out that process tree for us. And what we're expecting to see here is everything that came from Word. I really like to do this sort of thing where we're choosing a higher process in the process tree, because what this will also help us with is identifying if multiple things were spawned at the same time. So earlier we specifically looked at just the series of events that led to the Kali Connect. But now that we've moved further up in this process tree, we might identify some other things. So let's take a quick zoom in on that. Perfect. And let's see what happened. So just like before, we'll start with the object that has none of those little chevron marks, and that's Word. There's that process ID that we searched for, and Word in this case was launched by Outlook, just like before. And we can see Word was launched with a similar looking file name and file path, that a similar DECL ASSG. We can see the same PowerShell launching and downloading that threat menu application. I want you to imagine that threat menu is kind of a first stage dropper here. So there's PowerShell. It went out to that same URL, downloaded the dropper application, and executed it. And so far, we're seeing some similar PowerShell. Let's scroll down just a little bit more, and let's take a look at, there's a similar series of events PowerShell. What did that do? That then launched again and downloaded another application. That's what started this hunt all off. We were looking for that Kali Connect. And there's a very similar series of events, Kali Connect launching and then firing off to MSHTA. But it's super subtle, but I can see on the scroll bar, there's quite a lot else that went on here. So let's keep scrolling. Now, there's that PowerShell node that has no other commands associated to it. So that's where we kind of think that the attacker may have dropped to PowerShell to do something. There's an interesting application that launched Putty. I think you may have seen Ashek do some stuff with Putty a couple of weeks ago as well. But let's keep going, because there's more interesting stuff here. There's more PowerShell, and we didn't see this before, because this is things that are being launched by threat menu itself. So it was a really good idea for us to step up and up to that Word process and now see everything that came after it. And what we can see is some more PowerShell. And PowerShell doing, again, something pretty similar, reaching out, grabbing now this application called threat seed. It executed that application with a number after it. So it ran this application and told it, carry out whatever function 8 is. And then we get a couple of really interesting commands. We can see that function 8 launches the command again, and now it actually tells this task scheduler to create a scheduled task. Now, as we look at that, what's it telling us? It's telling us the name of the task, that it should be executed once, and that it should be executed just, by the looks of it, just a few minutes after it was, the scheduled task should be executed just a few minutes after it was generated. But the really concerning thing there is that action. So we're worried about this PowerShell that is encoded. That's super interesting. We saw some of that earlier that we think was our attack tool seeding its beacon up into memory. So we're a bit concerned about that. And that kind of takes us to our next poll. And that is, there's 3 things that we've identified through these various process trees. The first is this PowerShell that you're seeing on screen right now. So, and let's get that next poll launched. Perfect. So one of the options that we can do now is, and for those of you tracking on the threat hunting framework, we're now moving into the inform and the enrich section. So now we want to go in and take a look at what else can we learn about this particular threat. And the 3 options that we have for you, the first is, should we investigate this encoded PowerShell that we're taking a look at right now? Or if we scroll back up and we find our Kali Connect process, we remember Kali Connect was reaching out to this URL, this Netflix with 2 I's URL, and it was pulling down something called launcher.hta. Should we investigate that command and control server? Or I described the threat menu application itself, and that's going to be just a little bit further up, one of the early children of the PowerShell there. That's a portable executable. That seems to be our dropper. Should we investigate that dropper itself? So now that we're here at this inform and enrich stage, those are the 3 options that we've got. And Nick, I think as I take a little look at the results, I think we've got another landslide winner.
This one's a bit clearer. Yeah, everyone seems to want to see you decode that PowerShell, Andrew. So I think that's the challenge. Let's jump into that.
Perfect. Okay, so this is, and I think you guys saw this process, a very similar method that we'll use here. And one quick tip right here. We've talked a lot as we go through about gathering data. And one of the things that you can't see what Andy's been doing, but as we found some of these interesting things, Andy's been copying and pasting and dropping those over into, Andy, I must confess, I don't know your tool of choice if you're a Notepad++ man or a classic Notepad man, but we're grabbing those artifacts and, oh, look, there we go, and saving them for later. You can do this as well by hitting that export button right here in the results. For some of these really long queries as well, for some of these really long results, it's not super obvious, but you can triple click on the result area, and it'll actually highlight the whole thing, even if there's content that doesn't fit in the column. So that's what Andy's going to do now. He's going to triple click on this whole string, and we can just copy that and grab that. So we want to use, to decode this PowerShell, we want to use a tool that I think has been covered in one of the other sessions as well. It's a tool called CyberChef. Now, obviously, Nick, Andy, and I are a little biased for CyberChef. It's written by an organization called GCHQ, the Government Communication Headquarters out of the UK. And it's a fantastic tool for running through really any kind of manipulation of encoding, and it's got really interesting stuff in there. You can unzip strings of text. We've seen some adversaries do that as well. But we've tested this out before, and the things that we need to do right now are we need to decode that string out of base 64. There's also a little bit of UTF encoding that we need to do. So that's the two recipes, or the two ingredients of the recipe that Andy's added. And we can just go ahead and paste in the results of that into the input. Now you see it brought the entire command. We can get rid of that. We're just interested in that base 64 string. And when we look at that, so remember right now, what we're looking at is the action that a scheduled task was supposed to take. And what we can see there is that that action was to run this PowerShell command called IEX. That means invoke expression. And then essentially, so what that's saying is, hey, PowerShell, go run whatever you find from the next command I give you. And in this case, the next command is go get the contents of this URL. So there's the web client connecting to the download string, and there's a URL. This is really interesting because what this means is that the attackers can change what this scheduled task does at any particular time. So let's go ahead and select that whole URL. Let's go and take a look at Pastebin, and let's see what this scheduled task is going to do when it executes. And right now, there's two different commands in there. What we've done is we've set this up to simulate some persistence. So we want to imagine that the attackers here have done some staging, and they've said, in the future, we want this machine to reach out to a command and control server. We're simulating that here by having it connect to our simulated command and control URL up at the Sophos test website. But the next bit is really interesting because it actually starts the scheduled task process and tells it to delete it tells it to delete the scheduled task. So it goes and launches the command and control beacon to establish a connection back, and then it clears up its tracks. It deletes itself from that list of scheduled tasks. And a little spoiler alert here, if we'd built a custom query earlier, we'd have actually taken a look for scheduled tasks, and we'd have seen that on one of these machines, the scheduled task didn't exist. So that's what this particular piece of PowerShell would have done. And I would definitely recommend using CyberChef. It's a fantastic tool if you're seeing that encoded or obfuscated content. But Carl Ackerman, or I like to call him superstar product manager for EDR, actually wrote a query and posted that up onto the forum that will do this first step of decoding for you. So CyberChef is really good if there's multiple stages in there. You will often see gzip and other compression technology involved in loading up some of those strings. If you have a simple case, you can go and check out the Carl's posting in the community for identifying and decoding that encoded PowerShell. So let's jump back over to Sophos Central and let's have a quick recap. So we've identified where we are on our two machines here. We've seen some pretty similar processes running across these machines, and we actually have time for just one more thing to do in our hunt today. So we'll start the poll for that in just a moment. And what we now want to decide to investigate is, we have three options. We can look into, whilst this attacker was connected to this machine, did they read any files? Are there any potentially sensitive corporate data that we might be worried about that's been accessed by the attacker? The other option is, did they write any files? Did they add files, whether that's malicious payloads? Did they encrypt any files? Did they change any files? Or did they run any commands? Did they drop to something like PowerShell and perhaps run some recon commands to try and understand the rest of the environment? So we just have time for one of these today, and we're definitely interested to see, did that attacker read any files on the system? Did they write anything back into this system? Or did they run any other commands that we've not yet seen through this particular process tree? And Nick, I think we've got a pretty resounding winner on this one again.
We do, and Andrew, all those kind of options clearly are interesting, and in a full threat hunt, I guess you'd want to explore all of them. But as you said, in terms of time, let's jump down that. Did they run any commands? And then afterwards, we'll maybe talk about what the other two might have offered us as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. And Andy, thanks so much, because we're actually going to run one of the queries that you used in your session. And for that, we're going to jump back, and you'll see that we've added this right to the top of the list, is using the PowerShell blocks command. Hopefully everybody's seen this from Andy's session. And yeah, let's choose both of those machines. Let's see if anything interesting happened across both of those. We'll make sure the start date and end date look good, and then we'll go ahead and run that. And let's zoom in just a little bit on some of these commands, and let's see what the attackers may have done. So we can see some of those same stagers that we saw earlier. We can see some of the commands going out and downloading the threat menu application of some of the others. But we've seen those already. Kind of the stuff we're most interested in right now is some of the stuff that looks a little bit more simple. And actually, that's a great one, Andy. So the attackers, whilst they were connected, we saw in that process tree that they ran and they looked at the PowerShell. They launched PowerShell, and now we're seeing that they just typed some stuff into PowerShell. So the first thing they did was, and we're attacking a local machine here. You can imagine this might be a domain controller or anything like that. So the first thing they did was list out all of the members of the local administrators group. They then created their own user here. I love the name of the user there. This customer has been owned. And then they started to do some other recon. They started to look at any of the logical disks. Now, there's plenty of reasons why they might want to do that. Pardon me, for mapped drives. Plenty of reasons they might want to do that. Of course, mapped drives are probably places where lots of files are stored. And lots of files means two things, really. It means lots of files that you can encrypt if you decide to turn this into a ransomware attack. It also means lots of data to steal and potentially exfiltrate. They then went out and listed all of the domain controllers. So we're seeing some kind of classic early stage recon that's being run inside of this PowerShell session. So definitely some things of concern here. And that takes us to the last stage really in our threat hunt today, which is to act. So now that we've been through all of those stages, we started off with our hypothesis that there might be a malicious IOC on the system. We went through our data acquisition and analysis stages and really understood exactly where this came from and exactly where what it did whilst it was connected to the system. We looked up over at CyberChef to fully understand what that scheduled task was going to do. And now the last stage that we have to do is act. And as you'll see from the framework document, there's two things that we need to do when we're in the act stage. One is if we think that this is a false positive, if we've not actually found anything interesting, we need to refine our queries to exclude some of the noise. I don't think we're in a situation like that, because I think we do have a bit of a valid threat here. We started with an IOC, and we've definitely seen some malicious activity. So that takes us to our very last poll for everybody today. So we're going to get that last poll launched. And what we need your help deciding is, from what we've seen today, and there's lots of options here to talk through, what is the first thing? So I want you to go through these and think, what's the most important thing you think we should do right now? And let's run you through these options. So we could potentially notify council if we think we've had any data loss. We actually didn't look at the files before, if any files were read, so we maybe don't know that right now. We could jump into live response and delete the scheduled task that was created. We could use our web control, look at some of the other tools on the network to block the IP address or the domain for these command and control connections. We could see, are there any active sessions right now? And we don't know that there are, but there's actually still an active session. Maybe we want to go and terminate the process that's running that active session. Should we delete the admin account? We do know that one exists because we just saw the creation of it. Or should we gather all of the SHA-256s of some of those files and add them to our block list right here? Now, this is where we have to confess, this is a really difficult question, because we are insisting that you tell us what's the first thing you think we should do. There's a lot we should do here. And it's kind of interesting as I take a look at the results. One thing is coming out that we actually don't exactly know is happening right now. So we think we should go and terminate a PowerShell process that has an active C2 connection. Nick, what do you think has everyone's chosen well there? It looks like that we're pretty solidly into the winner there.
That's where everyone wants to go, Andrew. Absolutely. So let's jump down into that.
Perfect. So for that, the first thing we should do, and I'm going to change the script on Andy just a little bit here. The first thing we should do is let's go and check that. So what we'll do is we'll actually jump back up to our main list of queries, and let's go and choose one of the queries under the network section, and let's run the query for processes with an open network connection. So what this is going to do is it's going to list all of the processes across the system that are that have current open network connections. And what we're interested to see here is we're looking for responses from the Academy machine number 2, and there we should see PowerShell. There it is, make a connection to, and there's our C2 IP address, the 11.11.10.201. So what we want to do here is we want to grab, this time we don't need the whole Sophos PID, we'll just take the actual machine PID. which is that first 4 digits. So we're going to grab that. And then it's super simple. We can actually just click on the name of the machine to the left. So we're going to click Academy 2 on the left. That's going to take us to this machine page. And from here, we're going to use live response. A couple of quick prereqs as Andy puts in the reason for our session here. Live response disabled by default as a safety measure. So you have to enable it globally. By default as well, you have to be a super admin to be able to use it, but you can create your own custom role. And now that we've got this session, what we can do is, I love it. Thank you, Andy. Check that we're connected to the right machine. That's super important. And you'll see that we're here in the context of the system user. And we can just go ahead here and drop into PowerShell. And that's the easiest way to do what we want to do. And from inside of PowerShell, we can run the PowerShell command to stop that particular process. So it's a stop process, and then ID, and then we send in our process ID there. We can go ahead and run that command. That's going to go and kill that process. And we can say, yes, that we should do that. So we've now successfully disconnected that command and control session from that machine. But let's do one final thing, and that's let's just prove that. So if we jump back to Live Discover, and we'll go back to our other tab here. We'll go back to run that same query again. We might even just select only machine 2 at this point to make sure that we're getting the quickest results possible. And what we want to look at on here is we should now no longer see that PowerShell process. So much shorter list, and as expected, there's no PowerShell connected. So that's great. We have resolved that threat as you voted to delete to kill that process that was connected. There was a lot of things in there, though. There was a lot of results and a lot of actions that we could have taken. And in the last few minutes or so, what I'd love to do is bring Ben and Nick back to just talk a little bit more about, I think, Ben, Nick, what would you guys have chosen on that last question? Would you have deleted that or killed that PowerShell process? Ben, what do you think?
Well, firstly, the audience was pretty upset there wasn't an option to isolate that endpoint. So kudos to everybody that jumped in the Q&A to say, why didn't they just isolate the endpoint? So shame on you. For me, I personally probably would have blocked it at the firewall first to see if there was more persistent connections that started getting blocked on the firewall, and then start manually terminating sessions. But that's just me.
I think that's a really good point, because we've definitely seen obviously with Live Discover, it's great. We get all of that visibility, but we can only get that visibility where the Sophos agent is deployed. So I really like that idea of blocking it right on the network. Nick, what do you think?
Well, I know, Andrew, we talked a lot about when we were planning this session about the isolation thing. And yeah, I agree with Ben. Really interested to see everyone come in with that. I know there's a reason we didn't do that, Andrew. And look, as you said, all those things really are, and like all the choices you go through the session, all have some validity. It was pinning people down to what should we do first. And in any given scenario, that's going to be different, isn't it, really, depending on the individual circumstances you're in, and also kind of the organization that you're working within. It may be that your process, and I know one of those options, Andrew, was inform your legal counsel. That might be the first thing you have to do for your role in the company or organization in. So I think the important thing is to be aware of the parameters that you're operating in, and do the first thing that makes sense to you. And then come back and go through, Andrew, I guess, steps 2, 3, 4, and make sure you've kind of ratted out every possible opportunity.
Yeah, for the sake of time today, we had to force you all to make some choices. I think questions 4, 5, and 6, when we looked at what things should we enrich, what should we look at files read, written, or commands executed, we had to cheat a little bit and force you to choose one of those, but the real answer is all of the above. We should really be doing all of those things. I'm so glad everybody was making noise about isolation, because I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. What I would say is, don't think of isolation as being one of the last things that you have to do. If you see earlier on in the process an active command and control session, something that is concerning to you, if you looked at the files being read and could see files being read from shared drives, you might want to isolate before you're ready to kind of wrap up the hunt. So don't think of isolation as the thing you do at the end. Think of it as something that you do potentially a little bit earlier in the process.
Yeah, exactly that, Andrew. And look, just while we're here, massive thank you to you and Andy Martin in the background there. That session came across so well. I was really, really good to see all of that. And thank you to everyone in the audience for interacting so well. As we said at the start, your guidance on what we did there was really key. That worked really well. Clearly, there's a lot of options that we could have gone down there, a lot of kind of route that, and I think as we said last week in one of our sessions, potentially some of those might be dead ends. You might go down one route and you may not find what you're looking for or something that helps you progress the hunt. That's a point to back up. And Andrew, I think that reinforces the need to keep notes, records, whether you use Notepad kind of in a written form or whether you're just kind of keeping some track of where you've been. That's really important when you're threat hunting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You can see Andy was copying and a big thank you to Andy from me as well. Andy was copying and pasting a ton of stuff out and into the console as we go. Those Sophos PIDs get confusing pretty quickly if you're just dropping them in. So definitely keep a note. Export if you want. That is a pretty good way of keeping a good history with you as well.
Excellent. All right, so we've got a few minutes left today. There's a few things I want to do. I want to make sure I touch on the certification and kind of rounding the session off. We did also have some really interesting questions through. So what I'm going to suggest is let me just quickly rattle through where we are with certification, with the on-demand sessions and those kind of things. And then if everyone's got a couple more minutes, we'll just take as many of those questions as we can for you and get some answers across. So all of the sessions that we've run so far in the series have been recorded, and hopefully some of you have seen those already on our on-demand page. If you haven't seen that, there's a useful link section just down underneath the video here, and that's got a link straight out to that on-demand page. And we're going to keep those sessions up there perpetually. You'll be able to get back to those. If you want to review them, if you want to pass them on to a colleague or someone else that you think might be interested, please share that link far and wide. All this information is really useful, hopefully, for you as you start to develop your skills in the threat hunting area. So that's there to catch up. The second thing to mention is the certification. And we said when we came into this series that attending all the sessions would give you that title of a Sophos EDR certified admin. As some of you know, we've had some challenges with kind of the platform we're using. If we started in Zoom, we've moved now to this platform. So we've moved away from kind of requiring you to attend all those sessions live. What we're going to be doing instead is serving up a very small and fairly simple test or validation of your knowledge. That's probably the better way to look at it. This Thursday, you'll get an email to all of you who have registered for this series with details on how to get to that. It can be a short assessment. The pass mark will be 80%, so you don't need to get everything 100% right, and you'll get the chance to go back and retry. The important thing for me, not is testing you, is making sure that you're comfortable with the things that we've been talking about here. And that's what this assessment will validate. It's not requiring you to go through all 7 hours of the content and review it minute by minute and take detailed notes. Please do that if you want to. That'll help you learn even more. What it's going to be doing, though, is just checking that you've understood the concepts of what we've been talking about. And there's a lot of the things that Ben and I have been discussing after each session. That tool set that you need to build up, understanding what you know and what you don't know, using the resources out there to help you get better. And I think bringing it all together the way that Andrew has shown so well today is stepping through that kind of process of doing a hunt. And that's what we'll aim to validate in that short assessment. So look out for more details of that in your email inbox on Thursday. And when you complete that, you'll get a certificate emailed to you that will kind of validate your knowledge for this overall. And the last quick thing to mention before we do jump into some of the technical questions is on the feedback for this. it's been really great after each session for all of you rating the session. We're going to send in that same email I mentioned, a feedback survey for the whole series. And that's where we'd really love to hear all your thoughts, your comments on how well the series has gone as a whole, but also what we can do better. What we can do better and what we can do in the future. We're running these Academy series on lots of different topics all the time. I'd love to do another Threat Academy session as we go into the future. We've got our XDR product that we mentioned a couple of times coming up, and that's going to be a great opportunity to carry on building on this knowledge for you. So look out for that, and please just take a few minutes to tell us what you think. All right, I think that's all the housekeeping done. So Ben and Andrew, I'm just going to come to you with a few quick questions, and these are ones, Andrew, that particularly came up during the session. One was around the parent process and the chevrons, and you talked through that in terms of reading how those are laid out. Can you just quickly explain for people how to navigate that view that you've got on screen, where you've got the chevrons and find out what the parent is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you run that query, you're starting with a Sophos PID. That one that you've searched for will have no chevrons. And its direct parent will have one chevron, and its direct children will have one chevron. So the number of chevrons are a representation of the position in the hierarchy. So if it was, we saw Outlook launched Word, so the Word has one more chevron beneath Outlook. If that sounds a little bit confusing, and you saw Andy do a great job for us of widening some of those fields to make a little bit more sense, there is a numerical column a little bit further off to the right as well that gives you the index number, essentially, that those chevrons are calculated from. So yeah, I would say make those columns a little bit wider if you're running it on a smaller screen or a larger screen resolution. But yeah, hopefully that'll give you that relationship between parent, grandparent, child, grandchild processes.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Ben, there are a couple of questions which you helpfully answered while we're going on IOCs, particularly. So the first one is there any list of IOC SHA-256 that people can copy to help formulate those queries?
So no, IOCs come from threat intelligence. So like Sophos Labs, for example, have a GitHub where we do publish IOCs too. But that's where we form that hypothesis that we talked about in the earlier sessions. So if you're starting with an IOC and forming a hypothesis, well, you need to get that IOC or the indicator of compromise from some threat intelligence or from a source, and that can be anything. That can be, Sophos Labs GitHub. That can be Twitter. It can be Alien Vault Pulse. It doesn't really matter. So we can't really provide a list because they're dynamic and they're ever changing. So the answer to that is no.
Okay. And just to follow up to that, if someone was wanting to run their own mock or real threat hunt like we've been looking at today, are there any safe exes or sample files that they can use to start that investigation? Anything you can suggest, Ben?
Yeah, so DNS is an easy one to do because you've got control over it. So you can use your own internal DNS server to say, mimic facebook.com and do a fish and then hunt for it, or, create a domain name internally. Like the fake Netflix that we saw during the demo, and you've got control of that domain because it only works in your environment. The other thing, though, if we cast back to some of the earlier sessions, we looked at command and control frameworks. So if you're using, say, PowerShell Empire or Covenant, for example, they give you the ability to generate stages, which are, of course, executables you can then run in your environment and then use to start your threat hunt.
Okay, thank you, Ben. All right, so I think as we're coming towards the end of the time, I want to be mindful of everyone's day. I've got one more question to ask you both. And Andrew, I'll come to you first on this. We've covered an awful lot in the last 7 sessions, I know that. If there's one thing that you want people to take away and remember to be more successful in threat hunting, what would that be for you?
I think it's that InterceptX is going to do a really good job of stopping stuff. That's its job. So when it comes to threat hunting, That's really where you have to be proactive. So get into the console, get into Live Discover, start using those built-in queries as a great start. There's some in the MITRE section for Caldera that will potentially have some false positives. Nick, as you said, sometimes threat hunts are a dead end or a false positive, but just get into the platform, start using it, and really pleased that all of these videos are going to be available on demand. As you see things that you might think, oh, I remember Andy, I remember Chris talking about that, jump back in, review, and just keep sharpening and honing those queries.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And Ben, same question to you. What would be your one takeaway if you can find one out of everything we've talked through?
That's a pretty broad question. It would be, don't assume that you need to know everything. There is nothing wrong with going to your peers, using the internet, Googling, DuckDuckGoing, whatever you use for your search engine. You don't need to know every single answer. You just need to be able to collect information and then act upon that information you have. So it's all about investigation and broadening your knowledge with, the tools you have available, such as a search engine.
Awesome. Thank you both very much. Clearly, there's loads to carry on talking about here. We'll carry the conversation on our community forum. So if any of you got any more questions, anything you want to know from us or share with the wider group, please continue to use that. That's the way we'll keep this going. And that's the way we'll carry on the conversation until we can next all get together on one of these Sophos Threat Academy sessions. So with that, I just say another big thank you, Andrew and Andy in the background, for the session today. That's gone fantastically well. Ben, thank you for all your support over the last 7 sessions while we've been doing this. And to everyone else out there who's joined, participated in the sessions, asked questions, got interactive, thank you so much. That's what makes this so successful. Hopefully you've all learned something and can carry on developing as you go forward. So have a great day, everyone. We'll see you again very soon. Thanks then.